Well, before answering, there were a few realities we had to face. Inflation, investment returns, your health, any of these could shift. That's why flexibility is always built in. Wow, what a difference. That's a direct quote from Michael. Can you really retire comfortably on £54,000 a year? Now, whilst you might be thinking that this top line figure seems very reasonable indeed, with all the headlines about rising costs, market swings, and changing pension rules, you do start to wonder whether it actually isn't. You might check your savings, look at your pension statements, and the question keeps coming back, will this ever be enough? So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what £54,000 a year can mean for your retirement, what to plan for, and the adjustments that can make the difference between feeling anxious and feeling in control. By the end, I hope that you'll see that retirement isn't a distant dream or an impossible goal, and you might even have a feeling for what is possible for you. Not all is lost. Now, we've been reading your comments, and it's music to our ears to see how much our case studies resonate with you all, because those aren't just numbers and strategies, they're real people's stories. People just like you, actually, who started exactly where you are now, feeling like the odds might be stacked against them. So with that in mind, today we're going to focus on a case study where the couple had less than £300,000 between them, £257,000 to be exact. So meet Jane and Michael. They were both 55 when they came to Reeves, and to be honest, they arrived with one clear goal: to get their finances in order and find out when they could realistically retire. Now, it's a question we hear often at Reeves, probably every day actually, but for them it carried a very personal weight. Let me tell you why. Michael had recently lost his last remaining parent just shy of their 77th birthday. With no parents left and with their own children to think about, the experience made them both reflect seriously on their future. Michael had spent most of his working life as a senior data analyst, earning £45,000 a year at the point that he came to us, and over the years he'd built up two older pension pots worth 123 grand alongside his current workplace pension of £32,000. Now together that gave him 155,000 tucked away for the future. On top of that, he was contributing 5% of his salary each month, with his employer adding another 3%, and he'd recently received a £65,000 inheritance from the last of his parents. Now, the numbers only told part of Michael's story. He was the father of three. Two of his children were independent, whilst his youngest was away at university. Now, Jane's journey looked a little bit different to Michael's. For many years, she'd been a full-time mum, raising their three children and keeping the family home running whilst Michael worked. It was a role she really cherished, but it also meant she hadn't been building up the same level of pension savings during those years. Now, once her children were older, Jane returned to work part-time as a sales assistant in a local cafe, and she earned just over £15,000 a year, but she did love her job. The role provided both income and social engagement, allowing her to contribute meaningfully and maintain a sense of purpose. Like Michael, she paid 5% of her income into her pension, with her employer adding 3%. Now, over time, she'd managed to build up three pension pots, together worth £55,000. So altogether, their financial picture was starting to take shape. The mortgage had just £15,000 left on it, a great position to be in, and their home was valued at £265,000. That was more space than they'd need once all three children had flown the nest, of course. They began to dream a bit about moving into a cosy two-bedroom bungalow nearby. They were forever walking around the local housing estate saying, "Oh, that looks nice." We've probably all done it. With a budget of £150,000 to £180,000, Downsizing could release around 85 grand in cash. So at the time of seeking advice, the total savings and investments stood at a grand total of £275,000. Now, their plan was deliberate. You might even say it was meticulous. They wanted to retire before reaching the state pension age, especially Michael, and their spreadsheet suggested that the earliest they could realistically retire with their savings would be around 65. They'd estimated that they'd need £4,500 a month, which is 54k a year, until they hit 75. Looking beyond age 75, however, they recognised that their lifestyle would probably slow down, and so they thought that £4,000 a month would be sufficient from that point onwards. Now, this was a deliberate decision to adopt a simpler, more manageable approach that suited their plans for later life. So, could they realistically retire at 65, living off £54,000 a year, and start living that dream? Well, Well, before answering, there were a few realities we had to face. First, inflation, the quiet, relentless force that slowly erodes the value of money over time. For their particular plan, we used the government's long-term target of 2% a year. Next, we looked at how their savings might grow. Their previous pensions had been invested in relatively cautious funds, so we initially assumed a cautious 3% net return. However, after completing a detailed risk questionnaire, which we do with every potential client, and some good conversations around what risk really means in today's regulated world, it became clear that they were actually comfortable with a more balanced medium risk approach for this particular part of their wealth. And that allowed us to assume a 4% return, and that did help their outcomes. Every little bit helps, as they say. Michael and Jane's full state pension, for example, which started at age 67, would provide a dependable foundation in the later years of retirement. Even with careful planning, life is never perfectly predictable, of course. Inflation, investment returns, your health, any of these could shift. That's why flexibility is always built in. So if you're watching and thinking that scenario doesn't really fit me, well, of course, that's fine. Every detail can be fine-tuned to match your personal goals, your circumstances, and how comfortable you are with risk. Small adjustments now can make a huge difference later. Anyway, with all this in place, we could start to see what Michael and Jane's retirement could realistically look like, and where small, thoughtful tweaks might help them enjoy it more fully. Now, when we produced our Where Are You Now graph, everybody's attention was focused on the unpleasant red section. The harsh reality of their retirement plan was that their savings would run out by 77, giving them barely 12 years of the retirement they imagined, and by the time they reached 90, they'd have had to find almost £300,000 from somewhere else. It was pretty clear something had to change. Now, I'll be frank, meeting people who believe they have enough and telling them they probably don't is a tough part of what we do, but at least it gives us a chance to turn it around. So the earlier you dive into the reality of what's possible, the better, folks. Now, with the right guidance and a realistic plan, what once felt impossible can definitely become entirely achievable. And there is one thing every single person we speak to has, and that is options. So we got to work. Now, as I said, Michael had 2 pension pots from previous jobs, and Jane actually had 3, scattered across different providers, mind you, which is pretty common, and that meant lots of paperwork and a challenge to track performance or know what fees they were paying actually. This is a very familiar challenge for clients and advisors alike, and I expect many of you will have a drawer full of paperwork, probably not opened or not understood if you've not just chucked it in the bin. So step 1 was to consolidate those pension pots into one clear, manageable plan each. The result, well, it was better control. Actually, it was lower fees and access to stronger investment options, which can play a significant part. Consolidation is not always simple, mind you. Some pensions are actually best left alone. That might be because they've got valuable guarantees or features that might be lost if they moved elsewhere. But for Michael and Jane, it gave them more clarity and a better path towards the retirement they wanted. Now, Michael had received a £65,000 inheritance from his last of his parents, if you remember. And it wasn't just money, it was legacy. It was a symbol of their love and support. And rather than letting it sit idly, we explored how it could actively strengthen their future. Together, they decided that Michael would invest £20,000 per year into his ISA until the inheritance had been fully utilised, making the most of his annual allowance and ensuring the money worked efficiently towards their long-term goals. And by doing this, they were not just saving, they were integrating the inheritance into their retirement plan. It provided both a safety net and an additional bit of flexibility, supporting the financial stability and independence they were really working hard to achieve. Then there was the house. Well, they'd got plans to downsize to a more manageable 2-bedroom bungalow, if you recall, mainly wanting a spare room for the grandson to stay over. Their home in Northumberland was valued at around $265,000, and they had their eyes on a bungalow priced at no more than $180,000. For simplicity, we're going to use these figures as an example and have not included costs like estate agency fees, stamp duty or moving expenses. The difference of roughly $85,000 wasn't just a number. To them, it represented financial freedom and the choice to live a simpler and better life. So we helped them channel this money into ISAs too. Now, in the UK, each person can save up to £20,000 per tax year, either into one account or split across multiple ISAs. So the couple plan to contribute the maximum each year until the amount was fully invested. Now, they specifically chose to use ISAs rather than add it to their pension because they wanted the money to remain accessible, just in case their future needs change, because that might have been home renovations, it might have been a new car, or it might have been helping the kids. We'll show you the impact this made in just a moment. Next, we discussed phased retirement. Now, Michael wanted to retire before reaching state pension age, if you remember, to have more time with his family. That was his biggest goal. Spending time with his grandchildren and supporting his daughter with childcare were important priorities, making early retirement a key goal. Early retirement often involves quite a few different trade-offs, and what we did was presented a phased retirement plan and demonstrated the potential impact it could have, allowing their savings to grow more effectively over time. Michael and Jane discussed the options carefully. Whilst no plan is without compromise, the focus is on creating a strategy that works realistically for their particular goals. And that's exactly what they did. Jane enjoyed her part-time job. It gave her the reason to get up in the morning, a social life, the chance to work alongside colleagues she liked. She genuinely loved it. So they agreed that Michael would retire first at 65, whilst Jane continued on part-time. This gave her flexibility, time for family and herself, and the social and mental stimulation that work provided. Now, the final piece of the puzzle was probably the hardest to face. We had to talk about adjusting expectations. When we looked at their retirement income goals, it became very clear that holding on to the original fears carried just too much risk. The numbers simply didn't line up, actually, with the reality of how long retirement could last and how markets can change over time. So we asked them to consider a different route. What if, from age 60 to 75, instead of drawing £4,500 a month, they took £3,750? And what if, after 75, when day-to-day spending often naturally falls, they reduced that from £4,000 to £3,000? Now, this wasn't about unnecessary cutbacks, it was about securing the lifestyle that they wanted and working out what was possible. A small adjustment now reduced the risk of running out of money later, providing greater financial security and more confidence in their retirement plan. So we talked about what that looked like in practice. Maybe a 4-star holiday instead of a 5-star, maybe 2 weeks away instead of 3, maybe a few less big nights out a month. Nothing that would drastically reduce the richness of their retirement, but it would be enough to make a real difference in securing it. And in the end, they chose to enjoy more of their money earlier in retirement, even if it meant having a bit less later on. And now for the moment of truth, let's look at Michael and Jane's retirement plan after considering all of their options. Wow, what a difference. That's a direct quote from Michael, by the way. The shortfall was projected to be eliminated, based on current assumptions that is. Thanks to Jane's willingness to work a little longer, their pension pot was expected to grow to over £411,000 by the time she reached 65, and by the time they reached 90, they were forecast to have a surplus of over £60,000, which is a very useful cushion for unexpected healthcare costs, for example, or just to support their family later in life. Now, Michael and Jane's experience shows that retirement isn't about perfection, it's about understanding what compromises are worth making and creating a life that works for you. With the right plan, thoughtful adjustments, and a flexible approach, they turned a potential shortfall and a lot of anxiety into a sigh of relief. Now, if you're unsure whether your own retirement is on track, now is the time to act. We offer a completely free one-to-one valued at over £800, where we'll show you exactly where you stand and map out a retirement plan that works for you. If you click the link in the description below to learn more about our services, you can book a free review and hear directly from our clients about the difference it's made for them. And in our next video, we're going to be diving into one mistake that could completely ruin your retirement plans. And honestly, this is one you don't want to miss. It could be the difference between retiring with uncertainty or retiring on your own terms. So click here. I'm going to see you there.